Hello there friends, today I'm going to be showing you how to paint this miniature Dragonborn from the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. He looks pretty epic. He's actually the same miniature off the front cover. And if you guys think this miniature is cool and you want to paint along with me, you can actually buy one for yourself, linked down below in the description. And you can use the code ESO5 for 5% off as well. I've broken this guide up into steps so you can follow along easily. I've also listed the paints I'm using within the video to make your life easier. Now if you missed my previous tutorials on how to build the Dragonborn and how to prepare the resin miniatures, and the other video on how to undercoat the miniature in grayscale, I'll link those videos for you to watch in the description below, because especially undercoating the miniature in grayscale to create these natural shadows and contrast is very important before you actually start using the glazing painting technique. So let's begin by painting the skin on the Skyrim Dragonborn. I'm going to be using a mix of Ushabti bone and Ungor flesh from Games Workshop. If you don't have these paints, you can just mix brown and white to create a warm skin tone. It is important though that you actually thin your paints using a paint thinner, like a glaze medium or even airbrush thinner, like I'm using here. You may be wondering why we don't just use water. This is because paints are made up from two parts. The pigment, which gives you the colour, and the medium, which basically gives it that runny consistency. If you add water into this equation, it won't actually mix properly and you'll end up with an inconsistent paint that doesn't really cover evenly. So that's why we use glaze medium or airbrush thinner, which is the same thing, because it's just pure medium, and if we add this into the paint, then it will thin it down so it remains consistent and translucent. You want to thin your paints down to almost a watery consistency. Your paint should look like this because we want it to be almost transparent when we come to put it on the miniature. Now put some paint on your brush and then soak off the excess on a paper towel, and then you can apply the paint to your miniature's arms. You can see the paint is translucent and we can see the highlights we did previously on the base layer through the paint. It's better to have your paint too thin and do multiple layers of glazing instead of having too much paint on your brush that you cannot remove it later. Once you've covered all the areas of skin on the Dragonborn, his exposed arms, hands and also his neck and face, you can leave it to dry and come back with another layer later on to build up the saturation of skin tone colours. Next though, using the same technique, we are going to paint the leather areas of the miniature using Rhinox hide from Games Workshop, which is brown paint. We're going to cover most of the miniature in brown since most of the Dragonborn is armoured in leather, but you can see that the paint is thick enough that the highlighted details of the miniature, like the rivets, are still showing through. Just a quick note though, I do suggest using Games Workshop or Vallejo paints to paint your miniatures, because these paints are high quality in pigment. And if you try and paint your miniature using cheap acrylic paints, you're going to be making it much harder for yourself. Honestly, these paints last a long time as well, so do invest some money in getting a good set of paints. Now we're going to mix together some Rhinox hide and some Ushabti bone to create a slightly lighter tanned leather. And then we're going to use this to highlight the areas of fur on the miniature. While the leather armor is dark, the fur is naturally lighter in color. You can see the areas I'm painting on the fur in lighter brown are from above where the light's going to be coming from, and it may seem random in some places to you, but I find the more experience you get painting miniatures, the more sort of idea you have about where these lighter tones should go. So it really does come with practice. After that, we're going to use something called Agract's Earthshade. This is a wash, which is a very thin paint. You could also instead use a extremely thinned down brown paint for a similar effect, or you could just buy this wash from Games Workshop, which has been done for you. You're going to apply it all over the leather and fur of the miniature, and make sure you do not completely drench the miniature in the wash. You only want a very thin and even cover. If you notice any areas of pooling or puddles on the miniature, just dry your brush on a paper towel and then use it to absorb and spread out the wash in an even area. I'm also painting the muscles to better define them, and also considering the Dragonborn has just killed a dragon, he's not going to be, extremely clean. He's going to be a bit grimy and dirty, and we kind of want to reflect that by washing his skin in this brown wash here. You can see that the washing technique brings back much of the detail in the fur and armor that you may have previously lost. I'm using the wash to build up darker areas of shadow on the right side of the miniature. You don't need to do this, it really depends what kind of effects you're looking for. While that dries though, let's take a look at the base. We can wash the base with nulling oil, which is basically just another wash from Games Workshop. This is going to tone down the rocks to make them a darker shade, because I really want the base to be darker than the actual Dragonborn model itself, so it doesn't detract from the main centerpiece. I'm also going to mix some Agrex Earthshade with a little bit of XV88, which is just a brown paint. This is going to create a very watery brown wash, which I can then apply to the slain dragon's tail. And you can see the areas of the highlights are still shining through below the paint. I wanted to keep the dragon's skin a natural tone that is in keeping with the miniature, but you can paint this dragon's tail red, blue or green if you want. It's really up to you. I just think that you shouldn't contrast too much with the main Dragonborn miniature, since the base is not the focus of the miniature. I'm also going to be using some Agrax Earthshade on the base to blend it in with the nulling oil and make the rock seem a little bit dirty and green and grimy, and just a little bit more like there might be some moss on it or something. Now the Dragonborn is dry, I'm going to go back over the fur to create some small highlights where the light is coming from, using a bit of XV88 brown again and Ushabti bone. Next, we're going to do the metal areas using Ironbreaker from Games Workshop. This is a metallic paint. Be sure to thin it down since it can be rather thick. We want to cover over all of the metal areas like the swords, the helmet, and the belt buckles and the chest plates here. Don't worry about the studded rivets yet, we're going to cover those in a moment. Just make sure that you paint the arm guards and the feet guards, which are barely visible through the rope that they have been tied on with. We can repaint that rope later though, so don't worry about going over the lines just yet. Next we're going to use the Rune Fang Steel, a brighter tone of metal paint from Games Workshop. This will be used to highlight areas of metal on the miniature, specifically the metal studs on the hide leather, which we can now carefully highlight. And as you can see, I probably need a new brush to do this because mine is pretty screwed. This will take you a little while though, so just take your time with it. It is a lot harder to cover up mistakes at this point. But next we're going to grab our Ushabti bone and we're going to come back over the fur to make tiny little highlights of individual fur strands and just kind of pick up that texture using a dappling process. This gives the fur a more natural varied tone instead of just being one block colour. Just really take your time once again and try and pick out random individual strands towards the top of the miniature where the light's going to be coming from. We're also going to go over the top of the ropes that tie the Dragonborn's armor onto his leg and arms. Once again, you're going to want to take a little bit of time with this so you don't paint over the metal areas that we just painted earlier. After this is finished though, we want to create some contrast on the miniature once again. So you're going to get your nulling oil and you're going to wash the metal parts of the miniature to make the metal look aged instead of being fresh and unrealistically shiny. You can also redefine areas of shadow using this dark shade, like under the belt on his back, to create a further contrast if you wish. So you can really start to pick out some more dynamic shadows, because obviously as we layer up paint continuously, we start to lose our contrasting undertone that we started with. You can carry on going, highlighting more details, but in my opinion this model is now of a pretty decent tabletop standard. So what I recommend doing is finishing it off by going over the lip of the base in a black paint just to frame the miniature, and you can even add some snow onto the base as well, because we are in Skyrim and it's pretty damn cold in Skyrim, my friends. But at this point the miniature is basically done. I thought I would spend a bit of extra time painting this miniature, but in total I think it took me maybe a couple of hours to get it to this standard. If you guys found this video helpful though, make sure you subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon for more painting guides in the future. I'd also appreciate a like if you've watched the video this far, because it really does help promote the video. And if you want to go the extra mile, I also have a Patreon channel, which is mainly to support my gaming content, but you can go there if you want to donate anything to me if you found the video that helpful. Or you can just spend all your money on the miniatures linked below, which, to be honest, I would do if I was you. Don't give money to me, just spend them all on multiple Skyrim figurines, because they look much cooler. But thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Have a fantastic day, and goodbye.